From the top. One of the things I might have mentioned already that is happening that is really, really great is that many people, friends, former coworkers, colleagues, whatever you want to call them, they're reaching out and they're helping connect me with other people. And that's been particularly useful when it comes to this podcast. And so this interview is an example of that, where a friend reached out and said, "Hey, you probably want to talk to Andrew Miller." I'd never met Andrew before. I'd never talked to him before. And he was introduced to me. He worked at Sidewalk Labs. And for those of you who are not familiar with Sidewalk Labs, you can Google that and you can find out all about what was going to happen with Sidewalk Labs and the city of Toronto. They were planning to build the city of the future, right? They were going to build a series of technologies. They're going to build a whole new set of things that they could deploy in a city to build the city of the future, and they were going to do that right here in Toronto. The company Sidewalk Labs was part of Alphabet. So although I also worked for Alphabet, and we'll talk a little bit about that, Andrew worked for Alphabet at the same time I did. He just happened to be in a different part of the company. But ultimately Sidewalk Labs didn't succeed, and it kind of just fizzled out and disappeared. And so I was excited to talk to Andrew to find out what happened. So without putting any more words in the way, let's hear how my conversation with Andrew Miller went. Andrew Miller, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. There's a lot going on these days, and it's exciting. So many irons in the fire.
Tell me what is going on. Well, before we get into that, I was going to ask you a different question. So we've kind of met through some mutual friends. Where did you grow up? Are you a city boy originally, or did you grow up outside of the GTA?
So I'm speaking to you today from my home in Mississauga. And Mississauga is where I was born. It's where I was reared, and it's where I've lived my whole life, my 20s accepted.
Nice. So you're a city boy. You are like Saga proud.
I am. Mississauga in my youth was very much a bedroom community, and I got into Queen West in the 80s was the area that it was mad, bad, and dangerous to go. It's sanitized a lot since then, but I spent quite a bit of time on Queen West in my youth just to get out of what was a boring suburb, but it's no longer true that it's a boring suburb.
Right. So you used to
small city in its own right.
Right. So you used to steal away to the dirty edge of town on Queen Street in the days when it was scary to cross beyond the park into Parkdale.
Yeah. Well, in those days, we might talk about this later, but increasingly I'm thinking that future generations will think that 2005 was as an important a year as 1945 or 1870 in terms of the world changing. So for those for those of our listeners who don't remember a world before 2005, we used to have this thing called physical media. And physical media, one advantage of it is that when you didn't want it anymore, you could sell it. So you could buy it cheap. So Queen West back in the 80s was where you could go to find used books, used cassette tapes, and rarely used CDs. So if you didn't have much pocket money, as I did not, that's when you were a voracious reader and listener. That's where you went.
It's so funny you say that. I was just telling the story to someone in the last couple of days that a little before that, but not too far before that. Maybe it must have still been the 90s. But I managed to, at the right time, when the market was still hot for this, take my entire collection of audio cassettes down to Queen Street and liquidated them before like the used music scene realized that no one wanted audio cassettes anymore. And but I literally had hundreds of of cassette tapes, which I was trying to explain what a cassette was to my son about 2 weeks ago, and it made very little sense to him. So I sold hundreds of tapes, and I think it allowed me to buy 10 CDs. Like I think I was able to flip that from hundreds to 10. Of course, then there was Columbia House. Columbia House filled the void for a while, which is also a throwback that I think our children and the current generation doesn't understand. But so that was
you know.
Right. If you know, you know. So 2005 is the line in the sand, you're saying, when the world went from physical media to digital media?
Well, no, I more precisely, we can say that 2005 was the launch of the iPhone.
Right.
And it was the iPhone that made not the internet, but the mobile internet. We are living in a world that is defined by ubiquitous, always on, high quality computing, cloud computing in our pockets. And pretty much everything about the commanding heights of our world today is driven by that fact, such that I remember the pre-2005 world very clearly. I think I do. But it is still, in many ways, it is unrecognizable where we are.
It is true. I mean, it is fair to say we're now walking around with a supercomputer in our pocket all the time, and that was not necessarily true, not in the same way in the era before the iPhone. I was showing last night to my students we were talking about brands that had gone through a rebrand, and the example that was referenced in the textbook that I thought was funny and then played up a bit was BlackBerry. And so I actually showed them, one of the last BlackBerry ads when they were still trying to make a good go of it. It was from a little later. I think it was actually from like 2013, and they actually, they were trying to lean hard into trying to make the BlackBerry cool. So that was the era where they like enlisted Rihanna and Diplo to be their spokespeople. And so they had Diplo in a suit with, traveling the world DJing with his BlackBerry. And like something isn't connecting here. This isn't working exactly the way they planned. But you're right. That's a very important change, that everything changed. So how does that relate to the world as you think about it now, when we talk about, transportation, mobility? Well, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't we talk a little bit about who you are and your work experience briefly, and then let's talk about how our worlds almost overlapped but didn't. So
sure. So, like I said, I've been in Mississauga all my life except for my 20s when I was getting my education, which was in a really speaking of worlds that passed away. Back then, I was a professional historian. So I was studying early North American history in the 17th and 18th centuries, which I started as an undergraduate at McGill, and then I moved to Yale, and then ultimately to Johns Hopkins for a doctoral degree. But by the mid 2000s, I decided I no longer wanted to be a professional academic. So I quit and went into what am I interested in? What's my intellectual hobby? Let's do that. And it was mobility plan. I'd always been interested in how people get around cities, particularly how they get around cities or how they'll need to in an era of climate change. So I said, that seems like a good problem that I can really spend my time working on, where I could make a difference. So I transitioned out of academia into civil service in 2006, which was really good because the market was about to fall out of academia in 2009. I was at a reunion, and a friend who was slightly envious and slightly drunk told me that I'd sold all my stock in September of 1929. I was like, yeah, I guess I did. Good timing. That's a historian joke. So I was in government, and I spent 12 years in government in Ontario and actually here in Mississauga doing transportation work, transportation policy work. So I made capital funding decision recommendations for the Minister of Finance. I ran the transportation budget, all $1.2 billion of it for the province of Ontario. I did special projects. I ran the Municipal Transit Policy Office. And for the city of Mississauga, I planned a brand new rapid transit line that is gradually inching towards implementation, fits and starts. But that was around 2018, that wrapped up, and I was not sure what I wanted to do next. And so, enter Sidewalk Labs.
Right.
When they arrived to town, I'd sent a few dealers to them saying, hey, you guys are interested. And they responded generically, and I forgot about it. And then sometime in the spring of 2018, they emailed me and said, hey, we are interested in expanding our Toronto team, and we're looking for someone to lead our mobility efforts. Are you interested? Are you available? And I said, well, let's talk about it. And what resulted was I ended up joining the team in July 2018. And I would, not to get ahead of ourselves, I would leave on July 2020. So it was a 2-year adventure.
A 2-year, it's sort of like a three-hour tour, but in this case, a 2-year tour. And this is where our worlds, although we had never met, we both, both our paychecks were effectively fronted by Alphabet, me at Google, you at Sidewalk Labs. I remember the day very vividly of the announcement. There was so much excitement at the office, in the media, among my Googler peers, and I think I even quipped to you that my wife and I talked about whether or not we should buy property in that part of the city, like we should buy something out east and in the East End, in anticipation of future walking commute to the utopia of Sidewalk Labs that never actually materialized. So let's dig into that a little bit. So let's talk about, so was it like 21 in dog years, or 2 years at Sidewalk Labs? Did it feel like a lot happened in a very short amount of time? And what actually happened? What happened in those 2 years?
Yeah, it did feel like there was always something new happening because the media, for good or for ill, mostly for ill, couldn't get enough of us. Politicians couldn't get enough of us. Everyone in the Canadian business was interested. Everyone in Canadian tech was interested. There's interest internationally. There was always someone coming by the office. There was always a news editorial to respond to. There was always interview requests. There was always a drama. So every day, every week, there was like felt like a new season of television show. It was a very exciting time. So the story, the story would begin before I joined.
Right.
So Sidewalk Labs started just as a pet project, skunk works for an new kind of urban future. Larry Page was interested in it. Started in the mid-teens as a thought lab. If we were really going to start a city from first principles in an internet age, how would we do it? And that was the name of the famous or notorious Yellow Book. City from the internet up.
From the internet.
How would you build a city based on 21st century principles?
Which is a really fascinating, I've stolen that phraseology and morphed it into other spaces, because I think just whether you're talking about a city, whether you're talking about mobility, whether you're talking about advertising or media or anything, to actually start with this notion, this phrase, what would be different if you started from the internet up? It's a really interesting way to think about things, and not the way most people approach things. I got swept up in that thought. I got swept up in that thought. It was easy to be wooed by the notion of, but it does reframe it does change the way you might prioritize things. Like, it does change how you would approach things if we were to start to build everything or anything from the internet. But we didn't get that far, did
No,
we? Yeah.
no, and it's seductive. Like starting from scratch on anything is seductive. Cities in particular don't. It is very hard to build a city from scratch. Not that people aren't trying. Some of my former Sidewalk colleagues are now involved in the project, building a new city outside of San Francisco. Some of my former colleagues are involved in doing something similar with Woven City in Tokyo. There are other projects happening around the world, but as much as they seem like a flavor of the month, there aren't many of them because it is really difficult to start a city. Cities generally appear where they are for good reason, and it's hard to take a place where there is no city and create one. Because if their conditions were good for that, there'd be a city there already.
Wasn't that one of the interesting, compelling things about the Toronto and specifically the East Docklands as a candidate for this, and that they're, even as Sidewalk Labs got more serious about this, there were only a few candidate city locations in the world that made sense to even attempt to do what they were thinking about. Is that an accurate statement, or was that kind of
what the vision is that we are not building a new city, we're building a new neighborhood. The city is already here for good reasons. We're building a new element of that city, and that's the thing that made Toronto competitive. It's one of the things that made it competitive was, here in Toronto, we have this vast, relatively underdeveloped space that is nonetheless within the nearest edge is 3 kilometers from the economic capital of the country. That is an unparalleled development opportunity. It doesn't speak well of us as a city that it exists. That's a missed opportunity on our part. There were other reasons. I think insufficiently appreciated is that Toronto is just at the very edge of what we might call the New York commuter shed. It is possible to fly from New York to Toronto, have a full day of meetings, and then fly home at the end of the day. Most of us don't think of it in those terms, but at a certain level, if you're running a project out of New York, Toronto is as far as you're willing to go. Like, you wouldn't go to Chicago. You wouldn't go to Boulder. It's just too far. So Toronto had that advantage going for it too. There were a lot of advantages, and that was so sometime after the Yellow Book, the date precisely, it doesn't matter. The opportunity for Sidewalk to come to Toronto was made available because Waterfront Toronto was looking to develop a portion of their holdings near the Portlands, Quayside, and they were, so Sidewalk saw the opportunity, and there was an RFP. Only Sidewalk was ultimately competitive. Sidewalk won, so they arrived. So at first, as you said, there was so much excitement. Prime Minister showed up to the launch. There's a great photo that we had in our offices of our CEO and the Prime Minister laughing together. People were excited about what it was that people recognize that cities have problems that seem intractable, and people were excited by the idea of a company that is known for its innovation, but also known for its resources, attempting to tackle them in a serious way. So at first, I think that it was all a long, steady glide downhill from the launch.
It all went downhill from there.
Yeah. Well, storm clouds were starting to gather. It turns out that sort of the summer of 2017 was maybe the very last time that anyone would say, "Hey, look at this big problem. We trust big tech to solve it," because around that time, the fact that Facebook had sold so much user data to other parties, and other parties had used that to leverage misinformation to swing an election in the United States in a way that Canadians as a whole did not approve of. It created a mood that was, for the first time since the iPhone, big tech was now the enemy for most people, or at least to be treated with some
skepticism. Yeah.
And so it created a perfect storm. I always like to say that there's three things Canadians don't like. They don't like Americans. They don't like big business. And starting in 2017, they didn't like big tech. So Sidewalk, it was a big American tech company. 3 strikes, we were out. We just didn't know that the game had ended in terms of public opinion.
That's funny.
So, but when I came on board in 2018, that was not obvious yet. What was obvious is there was a small, hardcore activist who hated the project, would never stop hating the project, still hate this project to this day. I was talking to a former colleague just earlier this week, and she was mentioning a meeting she was having with some people. And she mentioned that she worked for Sidewalk, and she had to smile politely for 3 minutes while they explained to her what the project was and why it was terrible. She just, because you have to smile politely. Well, there were a lot of views about it. We were marveling at the fact that this was still a thing that could excite such passion. Even now, even after the dust is settled and the story has been told, there's still people who aren't willing to read as writers. So, but we should speak about why revision. Like, what was the project before it got? Because there is so much misinformation then. There's still, as I said, misinformation now. We should begin by talking about what the project was.
Yeah, set the story straight.
The goal was, and I should say, I'm not spilling any secrets here.
Right.
It's true, I signed a non-disclosure agreement about internal stuff, but this isn't internal stuff. This was public at the time, and it's public now. The deal that Sidewalk made with Waterfront Toronto was, and there's a lot of legal things in the area, but at its core, the deal was, we want you to develop this area, this quayside, small, just a few hectares right at the intersection of Parliament, Lakeshore, and Queens Quay in Toronto. So we want you to build this neighborhood much like a traditional developer would. We want you to bring all of your cleverness and innovation to bear into doing it, while also moving the goalpost on all sorts of metrics like sustainability, social equity, use of the public space, inclusion, trying to make a better city on all these. So that's at Quayside. We also want you to, and then so further, we recognize that a lot of the things that we want, you can't build a system to do it when you're working on such a small canvas. Like, to pick an example, if you're trying to do district energy, so trying to provide heating and cooling at scale and not in a sustainable way,
right?
You could build a system to do that, but if you're only doing it for 5 to 7 buildings, it's going to be really inefficient. Something like that works when you can do it over a wide scale. So the initial deal is that as you think about, as it occurs to you how to make this work at scale, we want you to bring that into the project. And so from Sidewalk's point of view, it's like, okay, when this is then our business model. There's a 3-legged stool. Firstly, real estate development. We're going to behave just like any real estate developer does. We're going to buy this land for price X. We're going to add Y value by investing in it. And then we're going to sell condos or get rents, or we're going to then make it available to others at price set, where Z is greater than X and Y. So the difference will be profit. That is exactly what any real estate. Secondly, we're going to provide, that was called, internally we call that vertical development. And then we're also going to provide horizontal development, which are the things this RFP contemplates. The systems that we build that are not just good for this development, but only work at scale. So we think we can provide a water system that's compatible with the broader Toronto water system, the broader Toronto wastewater system, the broader Toronto district energy system. But we think that with our know-how and efficiency and such, we can provide something that is cheaper or better, both, than what is done traditionally. So we will do that, and that'll be made available for a larger geography, and we'll get paid for that too. The same way that the city would pay a contractor to install sewer pipes, they'll pay us to not just install these sewer pipes, but also technology makes the sewer work better. And then thirdly, if we come up with a better sewer pipe or a better thermostat or a better district energy system or a better mass mobility system, to get closer to what I was working on, we will own that, or a big majority of that, and we will sell that to other customers around the world. And that is how we will make money. So because we were going to be developing so much in the portlands, the horizontal infrastructure required this other undeveloped land in Lears Island and beyond, we had a dream of, well, why don't we develop that too? Since the system will only work if we're providing this horizontal infrastructure, why don't we get into a developer role there too? And there were a few visions that were floated. And our master plan, which is sitting on the shelf behind me, detailed a lot of the way that that might work. But it was a plan. It was always for negotiation. So that was the vision. And it's, yeah, it was a beautiful vision. No sense crime or spill.
Right.
But that was the plan. Now, against this, there was the opposition.
The opposition.
And I want to be a good rascal. So I'm going to steel man the opposition's points as best I can. I don't think that they were actually saying these things, but let's try and make the strongest, best case, which would be something like you were invited in to develop Quayside, but you're talking about developing all the portlands. You were given an edge to try to take online. Well, but the original RFP said we need scale here, so you need to talk about how to do these things at scale. There is no way you could make district energy work. The mobility systems we are on, you can't run a mobility as a service scheme on what would be the less size than one city block. No, scale was always imagined. We were encouraged and invited as part of our deal to consider matters of scale. That's what we do. The biggest concern of all was
data.
You are going to be running sensors. You're going to have sensors everywhere, which is true. We were perfectly open about that. And sensors, the credit would go on, is just a synonym for camera. Also true. That's what a sensor is. Like, we were going to be taking in data, visual, audio, other data from public spaces. So, why are you doing it? Well, our response was, there's all of this information, what we call public data gathered in public, that is necessary to run a system well. So think about any manager of any system anywhere in the world. If you are managing something, what you are doing is looking at the data. If you are managing staff, you want to know, are they making burgers as frequently as they're supposed to? Is the washroom getting cleaned every hour? To run a system, you need to have data outputs of what it's doing, and then look at the data and decide if the system is working as it should, and then you make adjustments. So data collection is at the heart of any sort of management system. So there's all sorts of urban systems that we felt needed to be managed that we needed data for. And this happens traditionally. It happens right now. In my world of mobility, you may have seen that it's someone sitting at a folding chair at the side of the road with a clicker, and every time a car goes by, they press it. they're taking what we call traffic, because we need to know how much traffic is passing. And then that tells us whether to adjust the lights, maybe widen the road or what have you.
And some of that is now can be automated, right? There are lots of systems that allow you to, see how many cars drive over whatever it is, whatever that is that they string across the highway or the road. But there's lots of ways that that counting can be done that is either systematic, that doesn't include someone sitting there, not to mention all of the cameras across all of the cities that are watching traffic patterns, correct? There's already a lot of data collected anyway, and no one seems to be too concerned about that.
Yeah. And this is one of the arguments that I made. It's like, if you want data collection to not happen, I'm sorry, it's too late. We've been doing it since before you were born. Automation just means that the data gets collected. The data is higher quality. It's more universal. It's collected in a format that's easier to analyze. But people would say, yes, but if someone is just clicking a clicker every time a car goes by, you can't trace that car to me. But if you have sensors up, it could be you are invading my privacy. Now, I don't want to be glib. People have a default expectation of privacy. It's one of their rights. And in liberal democratic societies, we take the right to privacy very serious. So our response to that was, look, we can do this in ways that don't invade privacy. So if I'm doing camera intersection counts, I can put up a camera that's sufficient. I can make sure that the fidelity of that camera is such that it doesn't capture individual faces. It's not that I could, but I choose not to. It's that I can't. The lens isn't good enough. It can spot a car, spot a bike, but it can't spot gravity. It doesn't know who you are. It just knows that you are a human being.
Right.
What mode of transport you use. And similarly, like if we were going to monitor people's energy use, we didn't need to know who they are. We didn't need to know how many people are in the park. We just need to have a little sensor that says, oh, the ambient temperature in here is this. So we should change it. Wastewater. Like we need to know if there is, we didn't know it at the time, it was going to become a big deal just right after the project died. We don't need to know whether there's COVID in the wastewater coming from that apartment, but we do need to know how much COVID there is in the wastewater coming from that apartment building.
Right.
We can get this data without invading anybody's privacy. And so most of the debate was about us saying, A, we don't want to steal your personal information. B, we're going to have all these safeguards in place to not collect your personal information. And getting the response, we don't trust you.
We still don't care.
We don't believe that you're only going to get the data that we want you to have. We don't believe that you're not going to use it in ways that somehow hurt us. Even we don't believe that you actually want to build a city. You only are here to collect this data. That must be like Google is a data company. It's not a city company. When you say you're building a city, it must mean that you want to collect data. So what you heard a lot was the city we were going to build was a Potemkin village, just filled with sensors. We were going to be stealing everyone's data, worked or passed through or God forbid lived.
Well, and that was certainly the narrative that was in the media a lot, right? That somehow, and it even, having worked at the company and selling ads at a time, it was sort of, it felt a little ludicrous because it was kind of, and I had conversations with clients about even if this was true, like how would it influence if I knew what was in your wastewater? Like legitimately, like if I knew what was in your shit, I don't know if that changes how I sell you a car. Like, I don't know if that like, even if I had that data and in some magical world, Google were to transform it and morph it into data that was used in ad buying, I'm not sure it's actually relevant. Like, I'm not sure it's actually useful. And so it's in, yes, there is data sensitivities. And yes, you're right. That time, that era was right when people's spidey sense got tweaked on, companies that have this amount of data are dangerous because they could fill in ... But the types of data that were intended to be collected were pretty innocuous or are already being collected, right? Are already being used by cities for the purposes of managing traffic and managing systems and population density estimates and the like. Is that not fair? Is that not true?
Well, I get so annoyed by this. I'm still annoyed by it now because it is such a silly argument. It's all premised on the profit. I think we've all heard is that data is the new oil. As oil was to the 20th century, data is to the 21st century. And it's such a false analogy because oil, you just it's sitting in the ground, you suck it out, you put it in a barrel, and then you sell it for $100 a barrel, and you don't have to do anything more. That is not at all like data. So, frankly, data there's far too much of it, and it's got far too little value. And let me count the way. So, a friend who works at Google now, and he did that, and I remember asking him about this. He was on the advertising team, and he said something to the effect of, if I want to sell you an ad for a vacuum cleaner, I don't need to know where you had coffee yesterday morning and how much cream you put in it. I just need to know that you type vacuum cleaner 2024 into the search engine. That's all I need.
Right? That's all you need. That, it's just the simplest, direct correlation between, did you just search for that thing? That's now I know. Okay, so you are looking for a Dyson. Oh, you are looking for a new vehicle. Oh, you are in need of new socks. Like it's the level of data required, or there are other things you can add to make that ad buying more efficient. But what you did yesterday when you turned the heat up or down, and what coffee you drank, and what your wastewater looks like doesn't really factor into that equation in any way.
Yeah. So there's 3 points about this data. One is Google or Facebook or anyone doesn't really need your data. They have it already just from your online behavior.
And you give it to them. Give it to them. It's already there.
And that's true. That's the second point, which is we have an experiment in revealed preference, which is most people, given a choice to sacrifice a little bit of data privacy for a little bit of convenience, they mash that convenience button every time. They just don't care. There's a revealed preference that, I don't see how it hurts me to give up the fact that I got 2 cream in my coffee. But if that allows me to get 10 cents off the cost of this coffee, I'll absolutely do it. And that is, we just need to see it in everyone's behavior. Like how many times did you actually read the cookies message on the last website that you went? You did. You just smashed that, accept all necessary cookies, or even just accept all, get this out of here. I want to see what Wikipedia or Simon's or whatever this website is. Just, cookie. Yes. Let me through. I want.
I mean, that problem's going to solve itself in a matter of months, but which is, equally ironic, right? There's been so much concern about cookies, and very soon that won't be a problem. That won't be a problem at all. You won't have to accept all because they won't be there anymore. But
argument 1 is data isn't as valuable as you think it is. Argument 2 is most people don't care. They treat it as though it has no value and trade for things that do to them have value. But the third thing is that it's already everything you are afraid of is already being done by other organizations. So in Toronto, for roughly the time that the project was going, we had a thing that was called the King Street Pilot, which is the busiest streetcar route in the country was King Street through the downtown. And there are so many private cars, to get back to I do, blocking the roads, streetcars couldn't get through. And so there was a decision made to let's make it as on a pilot basis so that no one could travel through on King Street. travel on King Street for 1 block, having turned onto it, whether then have to turn off the next intersection. You can't proceed through. And so this rule was initiated. Now they wanted to know, is this success? Are we actually getting, how's this affecting traffic? So at the same time, as everyone was clutching their pearls about evil Google trying to steal everyone's data, the TTC had a scraper up every intersection along King Street in the downtown, one of the busiest parts of the city. And it was every phone that went by was going into the phone through the Wi-Fi connection and pinging them to get a sense of where people were moving and how fast and what direction. Digital surveillance. The government is going into our phones to track our location in space in real time. Did they say they were going to do this? No. Did they ask anyone's permission to do this? No. Did they keep all the data? Yes. Are you allowed to see it? No. And yet, and was this public? Yes. I knew about it at the time, but no one cared. No one cared, despite the fact that you think the government is something to be more afraid of, stealing your data, whatever that means. So it illustrated to me that the problem was not what Sidewalk was trying to do. The problem was that it was Sidewalk trying to do it. And it was, I used to say that it's unfortunate that we were a pet project of Google. If we had been a pet project of Microsoft, well, even then, we've been a pet project of Netflix. If the Netflix CEO had done this, no one would have batted an eye. The fact that we were attached to Google, information company, no one could believe that it was just motivated out of a desire to try and build a better city. But it was.
I think about the, or if it had been a company that had just done construction before, like if it had come, not that that would have been very sexy and wouldn't have gotten the same kind of attention and coverage, but if some company that just poured concrete was like, yeah, we can build you a city. It also turns out we have a lot of technology. It wouldn't have caused the same kind of fervor. But I also,
and if Google had been able to buy the land first,
outright,
if it was just, hey, we're going to do this on land that we own, and if you don't like it, by all means, don't
visit.
Don't come to our buildings. There would have been some grousing, but it would have proceeded.
Was that ever explored as a possibility? Was there ever a conversation? I know that because this did start as one of the various, machinations, pet projects of Larry Page. Was there ever a conversation of like, okay, the way out of this is just to buy the land and build it and then lease it back to whoever, the city or people or blah, 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 however that deal might have been structured?
Oh, in fact, that was a step in the process that had to happen at some point, because the land was Waterfront Toronto had responsibility for it. At some point, the Sidewalk had to buy the land. But because the public agency was involved, and ultimately that is what doomed the project. It wasn't talked about a lot at the time, but my former CEO has talked about it frankly in public. There was a deal in place. A deal had been reached in the fall of 2019 to buy the Quayside land for a certain amount. And when COVID hit, the price that Sidewalk had agreed to pay was now deemed to be too high. In the wake of, because COVID had introduced so much uncertainty into the real estate market, no one knew what it meant. And now, 4 years on, we can say that uncertainty was right. If you look at what the value of commercial real estate is today, it's a fraction of what it was. And that's not how it's supposed to go, right? Real estate is always supposed to go up. Real estate today is worth much less. Commercial real estate in cities is worth much less today than it was in 2019 because COVID changed the world. And we didn't know how it's going to change the world in 2020, but it was clear that it would. So no one knew what that meant. It was injecting so much risk. I mean, back then we were more afraid about residents. oh, just COVID mean, epidemics mean there'll be no more cities. Obviously, that wasn't true, but no one. So the deal. So as I understand it, Sidewalk went back to Waterfront Toronto and said, "We need to reopen this deal so we can get a better price, and we'll make concessions, but it's just simply bad business." In this environment, that land is not. This was a force majeure. What we agreed to pay for that land is not what it's worth today. These conditions. And as I understand it, Waterfront's response was, if we reopen the deal, it's going to go the other way. The price of that land is going to have to go up. And I don't know what they were thinking, but I imagine it was something like, I'm not going to be the one quoted in a news story, the Globe and Mail, that says, I sold land to Google at a discount.
Right.
I would, I might get fired. I might not get invited to the good parties anymore. Have you?
I mean, they were probably not invited to the good parties anyway at that point, but that's a different problem.
Well, I guess everyone's definition of what a good party is.
Right? That's a whole other podcast. What is a good party? We can talk about that.
I'd love to come back to that. But the point is that a deal had been reached for the sale of the land. COVID meant that from Sidewalk's point of view, the deal needed to be reopened so the price could come down. And Waterfront meant that if the deal was going to be reopened, the price could only go up. And that was it. Like the two parties could not reach a deal, reach an agreement, a working agreement on the value of that land. And that meant that the project couldn't proceed. So the announcement of the day was COVID killed the project. And everyone says, that's not really what happened. I said, no, it is. It's just, it wasn't fear of a virus. Knock-on effects. Fear of a virus.
And then because that deal was not reached by the time we got to, later in 2020, it all fell apart without a piece of land, without the anchor of the real estate, and then with everything else that was happening in the world at Google and elsewhere. How did it all fall apart? And then where are the parts of Sidewalk Labs now?
So, like I said before, there was a three-legged stool of a revenue model. One was vertical development of real estate. Two was horizontal development of real estate. Three was selling innovations. Without a pilot project, you no longer have one or two. You just have three. So the day that the project was killed, I remember asking in internal meetings, are we going to pursue another project elsewhere? And there was some humming and hawing, but the answer came through within a few days. No, we've decided not. We're just going to do three. And I remember distinctly thinking when I heard that, well, in 5 years, this company won't exist.
Right. You're like, well, that was fun. That was,
yeah,
that was
it's over, because without you can make innovations, but without a place to prototype and showcase them, how will you sell them?
Right.
And I hate to be proven right, but that's what happened. So in the absence of an actual project in Toronto, there wasn't a future for me at the company. So I left in the summer of 2020, as did a lot of people. And so Sidewalk became, for a time, a holding company for just a bunch of project teams doing a variety of urban innovation hardware projects.
And those included things like they had the smart traffic light system that they were working on, right? What were some of the others? They had wasn't one of the sub teams at Sidewalk working on I know this probably didn't meld well with what was going on in Toronto at the time, but the high resolution street photography for, with the kind of line of sight to selling that to city planners, urban planners, and autonomy companies. What were among the other projects that still, not that they lasted long, some probably still exist somewhere in the bowels of the company, but what else was Sidewalk up to?
So there was a project we didn't use the term generative AI then, but that's what it was,
machine learning at the time. It was all machine learning at the time.
But this really was it was a form of a species of AI, which is
Right.
give the program a particular site, and then it can run through millions and millions of ways that you could use the site, and you could specify on like any number of metrics: shade, energy efficiency, density of housing, amount of green space, like anything that any city planner or architect might conceivably care about. You could tell the system, optimize for these things. I don't care about those things. These are nice to have. And then it would immediately produce however many instances of a site plan that hit those goals. It's called Delve. Another one was we had a system whereby you could put a parking sensor and you could embed it in the concrete of a parking pad such that it could tell you whether the parking spot was occupied or unoccupied. And there's lots of places that do that, but the advantage here was, as I understood it, it was 100x cheaper than the market leader. So it's something you could roll out every. And there were others. So Sidewalk became a company who's just sort of an incubator of these project teams that were doing these. Mass timber, trying to keep the ball moving forward on modular construction at scale of residential buildings out of timber. Variety of these projects. So that's what Sidewalk was doing. And then, great tragedy, the firm's founder, Dan Doctoroff, former mayor of New York City, became diagnosed with ALS, popularly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a disease where when it manifests, immediately you begin measuring your life expectancy in months rather than years.
Right.
It was a terrible, terrible blow. But Dan was in some sense prepared for it because he had a family history of it, but he announced, given I have limited time left on this earth, my two goals from now on are spending time with the people I care about and fundraising to defeat ALS or ALS research. And as I understand it, I haven't spoken to him in a few years, but as I understand it, he is given it, he's as good as his word. He's been doing just that, raising an immense amount of money. But in his absence, Sidewalk, it really ran on his energy, vision. Right. His absence, Sidewalk needs to be an alphabet company. All those projects were absorbed into Google. And so Sidewalk just became a brand that Google deploys occasionally.
And at the same time,
and then
that's when Larry and Sergey also stepped out of the company a bit, and so they kind of lost their sponsorship as well.
Yeah, Larry had left even earlier than that. That's one reason why. I mean, if Larry had still been around and been caring, when you are the pet project of the CEO, you get one level of scrutiny. When you're merely the pet project of a member of the board, you get another one. So that was before the project died. One of the things that contributed to its end. Just less of the invulnerability that comes from the CEO's brainchild.
Yeah.
But I mean, the final blow in it is, and this is what I tell people, is that even if there had been no COVID, the project had continued. I don't know if I would have succeeded because no one foresaw ChatGPT and large language models. And I'm not part of the family anymore. You're not part of the family anymore. But my understanding from people I know that are still on the inside is that large language models are being treated like a 5-alarm fire within Google. And any project team, if it is not touching AI in some way, then it's not advancing. The company sees failure to be on the cutting edge of AI as an existential threat. So building a better city, if it hadn't fallen by the wayside in 2020, it would have fallen by the wayside
in 2023
as a real existential threat emerged. I can't know that. We'll never know, but that's just.
Well, do you also think that that's I would if I was a betting man, I would bet on that too. That in a world where the internal focus shift was so severe to this is now what we do. It was true before. Like it was kind of like it was a smoldering fire and they threw gasoline on it, right? Like it was the Sundar talked for since like 2016 that Google was an AI first company, but it became reality in 2023. But are there not also now ways in which, and that's almost a pun considering the data that could be collected from ways or shared from ways, but that some of the vision of what Sidewalk was trying to do could be accomplished using data that already exists and machine learning, TTC data collection aside, and people's knowledge or not knowledge of that, some of the things that were planned are probably, and not that anyone's done them yet, are probably more within reach than they were further away because of large language models and visual models and the compute power that companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft have now. Would you agree with that sense? Do you think that some of the things are closer?
Yeah, I would. I would go back a bit and say to circle back to the very beginning of our conversation. The world changed in 2005 with the mobile internet.
Right.
Well, what is the mobile internet? Let's disentangle it slightly. The mobile internet consists of three things, and they all are linked to one's phone. One, better and better cameras, because we want to be able to take photos. So cameras are getting better and smaller. An always-on internet connection without a wire, so mobile internet. And then thirdly, massive amounts of cloud compute. And so what generative AI is, what it means is that cloud compute isn't just storing data, it is analyzing data and in ways that no one could have, and with the level of sophistication we didn't anticipate even a few years ago. Cyber, the adjective cyber, you know where that comes from? I just learned this not that long ago. It's from the Greek. It means having to do with sailing. Because a good sailor, as the wind and the waves change, adjusts the position and the fullness and the length of the sail so as to keep the boat traveling in the right speed and the right head. So cyber simply means taking in data about how a system is functioning and calibrating it slightly, adjusting it slightly for optimal results. And that's what, when computers came along, people said, oh, an automated system that can make adjustments immediately to get optimal results. That's what cyber means. Well, AI is I won't say the ultimate, but it is the new explosion of capability for cyber technology in our time.
It's cyber on crack. Is that what that's the?
Yeah, it is. This is something. This is the new summit. So I never talked about what I did when I was a cyber. Based on my history, you can guess I was doing mobility work. So I was advocating to get higher order transit to the development. And I was working with potential partners to bring in, maybe we were going to sell e-bikes. Every resident gets an e-bike. I was figuring out how many bike share docks, where would they go? Where do we find the public space for them? How many bikes is going to be optimal given what we expect? How do we preserve space for adjustment? How many bike racks should there be, like bike storage in the buildings? But also the fun stuff. What I thought was fun stuff is automated driving. How do we build a neighborhood where we expect people aren't going to own their own cars? We want them to be hailing a taxi bot. We didn't say Waymo. We were agnostic as to whom, but surely on our minds that there could be automated taxis, automated vehicles that you hire rather than that you own. You just use them to take a trip. And that's what I do now. Perhaps we'll talk about that. But when I think about what AI means for the future of mobility, it's here. It's two things. One, really powerful machine learning means that we can train automated vehicles better and faster than we could even a few years ago. It's going to make getting really sophisticated, really safe automated vehicles arrive faster than we expected. But it's also going to mean we have, I won't say it's necessary, there's the potential for a really sophisticated command and control system for networks of automated vehicles. So right now, the state of our technology right now is that if there is a Cruise taxi bot there, and there is a Waymo taxi bot here, and there's a private citizen in their personal Tesla in autopilot over there, they call it full self-driving. Each of those, the SAP lives entirely on the vehicle. It has to for safety reasons under current conditions. But with a sophisticated control system, you could imagine a ground traffic control system that also helps all these vehicles, despite the fact that they got different manufacturers, work together to bring even more efficiency out of the mobility system, that everyone gets more trips faster and more reliable. That's what I see the AI revolution offering mobility. Is we can get better individual devices and there's the potential for a better control system to make them all work together efficiently.
And this is what you're working. This is your focus, as you alluded, is now on autonomy. There's a tech analyst that I like, that I enjoy, that I read his newsletter, Ben Evans, and he's one of those folk who says things like, autonomous driving is 10 years away. It's always been 10 years away. Like that it's always 10 years away. It's been 10 years away 10 years ago.
Yeah. You'll always reach its summit in 15 years or 20 years, but that is a fixed point. It's always 15 years.
Yeah. So what is your, it's a funny piece of technology right now, and that it legitimately feels magical. And obviously there are places where Cruise has had its own issues with its program, but Waymo continues to expand. Waymo continues to expand in cities in the U.S., and so they seem to be.
They just opened up L.A. This week,
right? And they're doing they have Waymo employee, I guess, testing in Austin as well. They're just they're expanding into other cities outside of California.
They're in Buffalo. They're not, it's very much in stealth mode. It's just testing, but they've been in Buffalo this past week.
So, and isn't that as I understand it, and I could be way off, this is clearly not my area of specialty, that it's one of those, this technology works when the conditions are ideal. I remember an old video. There was an old video when the folk from, even before it was called Waymo, demonstrated that they were showing a video of what the quote unquote car saw. And the video, they would ask, what is this a video of? And it turned out to be the car was driving down a street, and it encountered a woman in a wheelchair chasing a duck with a broom. And it was sort of, for all of the scenario planning that they'd ever done, for all of the things that roads they had driven on, and all the things that the car had ever recorded, they're like, no one ever accounted for the wheelchair woman duck broom scenario. And that, that was illustrative of these are the things we're really trying to solve for. We're trying to solve for the things that are unsolvable. But the other challenge, speaking of Buffalo or most of Canada, is snow. That snow changes the landscape of the road and the road conditions so severely that current camera plus LiDAR doesn't know what it's looking at, or can't reinterpret the road in a way that would be realistic for driving. Is that accurate, or have we cracked the nut, or cracked open the case on autonomous snow driving?
So I'll say that I don't have any inside information, which is good. This means I can't betray any secrets on this subject. But there's 2 points here. As far as snow goes, yes, snow and ice continues to be a problem.
Right.
The fact that Waymo is in Buffalo means that they think that they must have think that they've got to do something about it.
That's what I wonder. If they're testing in Buffalo, that's them trying to solve the snow problem.
Well, it's also, I mean, we can be frank. It's also them playing nice with the governor of New York State by saying, look, we can bring economic activity to parts of the state that aren't Manhattan. But
Right.
now that you like us, could we please go into Manhattan? That's really where the money is. Again, I don't know, but I think
that's logical. Yeah.
But no, there's too much money to be like, it snows in New York too. So you could make money deploying in New York 8 months of the year. You could make money deploying in Toronto 8 months of the year. You'd make more money deploying in those places 12 months. So yeah, effort is being put into figuring out snow and ice. In fact, that's one of Canada's contributions to this. There's a testing facility in northern Manitoba that is, its sole purpose is to train automated vehicles on how to operate in snow and ice conditions. Because in northern Manitoba, they have a lot of it. Also some in Ottawa too.
Do they also need to learn how to navigate around polar bears? Is it in Churchill?
Well, I mean, I think if they could navigate around a woman in a wheelchair waving a broom at a dock, I think they could parallel a case. So snow and ice is a problem. It isn't solved yet. It's illustrated that right now it's only operating the American in North America. It's only operating taxi bots at scale in the American Southwest, where it's always warm and dry. It isn't just snow that's a problem. Rain
is also a problem
too, but it isn't an unsolvable problem. So, and a lot of people have said it's hardening into conventional wisdom that we will never have fully automated vehicles. Vehicles completely can handle any situation all the time. And to them, I'd say, never is a long time, but I would stipulate that we won't have before 2070. Pick a date after I'm dead. So, hold on. No, such a vehicle, I think it's fair to say, if you look at what we're doing now, unless absent some sort of stunning, unanticipatable breakthrough, we won't have it by then. But you know what? We don't need to have it by then. Like to use the iPhone example. Let's talk about Netflix. People were talking in 1999 about a world where you could stream video on demand. And then the oh so wise critics said, oh, but darling, there's not enough broadband in this country to give everybody that. It'll never happen. You're dreaming. And yet, here we are. People, we wanted it. There was money in it. So we found a way. Now it's commonplace. So if we want it, we'll put money into it. But again, you don't need to have the internet changed a lot. Even though in 1999 we didn't have full streaming video, it was still disrupting a lot of industries. I don't need a fully autonomous car with a whole stack on the vehicle that can travel in all conditions at all times to change the world. What do I need to change the world? It's what I've got. A truck where it's got a steering wheel. A human could drive it, but I can press a metaphorical button and it goes from one off-highway depot to another off-highway depot without a driver on board. It just does that consistently. That's not science fiction. We have it now. Deploy that at scale, supply chains look very different. And a taxi bot. Imagine a taxi bot. We'll use a Toronto example. Imagine a zone. The south is Lake Ontario. The west is, call it Bathurst. The north is, I'll call it Bloor. And the east is call it part of it. We could quibble. But a taxi bot, it only travels in those areas. It knows all of those roads. Sure, it moves slowly, but it can travel that. It does so only 8 months of the year, not, it doesn't travel from, they're off the roads from November through April. But the rest of the time it does that, and it is a quarter of the cost of an Uber.
I needed to go to Lansdowne. Can we change the western boundary to Lansdowne? That would be great. I would appreciate that.
Well, as you can see, what we're doing with Google is you start with it going to, maybe at first it only goes as far as Spadina, and then in 2 months it goes to Athens, and then in 2 months you can expand the service area over time. But
I don't get east of Spadina very often. See, that doesn't do very well for me. But
yeah, but you can see my point, which is a taxi bot that can travel. You do a trip any other point in that area, and it costs a quarter of what an Uber does.
I'm in.
It's always rolling. Well, how do you think that changes the city? How does it change the city if every third one of these, every third car is one of these? Flood the city with that. There's all sorts of consequences. They're not all good. I don't think we have time to explore all of those consequences. But the thing is, that's the technology that would change the world in some ways for the better. And we have it now. It's not science fiction. So yeah, maybe full self-driving, whatever that is decades away. But we are already on the cusp of our world being changed again this time by automated driving in ways that I think most of us fail to appreciate.
And that's the classic adage, a very popular one in the halls of Google of, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? Like, just let's not get too hung up on we can't see through snow or heavy rain. But as you rightly highlight, these kinds of services could be deployed now 6, 8, 10 months a year in many cities, even cities that get a lot of snow, quite successfully, and can be located or geofenced in a way that they only work on the roads they know, right? Or roads that are where they either, for whatever means, either through sensor or through better camera or better data or just driving those roads more consistently, these are the roads they operate on. And if you do live west of Spadina, that's me. Sorry, you're out of luck for the time being until we figure it out, until we manage to log the roads and the streets that are west of that. My last question for you here is, I'm intrigued by the title of your book. Tell us, I know you're not done, I know you're still writing it. So we'll probably have to have you back to talk about that when it's time. But tell me a little bit about what you're covering in the book. Tell us the working title of the book. Anything you want to share on that front would be wonderful.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm writing or co-writing with my co-authors, Gresham, John Niles, writing a book called The End of Driving.
It's got to be scary for my automotive friends. There, Andrew.
And that's what it is. It's so the book is about, what does it mean? What are our contention? So Byrne and John wrote the first edition in 2018, and it's been a big enough seller that the publisher wants a second edition. But so much has changed in this field in just the last 5 years that a lot more work needs to be done. So they asked me to join them to work it out. And what the thesis of the book, well, I'll tease you. Maybe I'll keep the pieces back from them. What the subject of the book is that full driving automation, we're not interested in the technology. We're interested in the social, cultural, and political implications. That's what I was saying before. Is that when you imagine this technology and then you imagine it at scale, there are so many outcomes that you can imagine. Many are positive. You can imagine a world where cities take whole blocks and say only automated vehicles come through here. And what would that be? Well, you could imagine that what that means is you can get rid of curbs. There could just be one flat level surface for bikes and pedestrians and cars, because you know the cars are going to move at a slow speed to not hurt anybody. So you don't need to segregate space by use anymore, because the reason to do that was danger. Danger has been removed. So you get so much space back in public. So for some people that's good, for other people that's bad, but it's a big change. You can also imagine a world where everyone has their own car, and so the marginal cost in terms of time and irritation of driving goes down. So people are in their cars much more, which is like, well, yeah, I can live in Peterborough and commute to Toronto, but I'll just sleep in my car, or I'll watch Mr. and Mrs. Smith on Amazon Prime in my car. That time is now, it's not wasted time, so I don't care if I am in my car. So people have longer commutes, which affects them in ways that maybe they don't appreciate, but are not bad. But it makes that much more traffic. So everyone's time gets spent more in cars. And if you don't have a self-driving car, well, then your life gets much worse, because traffic is worse everywhere, but you have to stay focused, hands on the wheel, tracking. There are so many ways that automated driving at scale could change the world for better or for worse. And the point of the book is to explore all these, to talk about the implications that are not obvious, the outcome, and specifically the outcomes that we think would be good, the outcomes that we think would be bad, and then which are the most likely, the default outcomes. And spoiler alert, they're mostly bad. If we want to avoid those, the steps we need to take to prevent those bad outcomes.
Right. That's awesome. I look forward to reading it. I've taken a lot of your time. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your comments on these subjects. I think we still have a lot to talk about. So I would love to have you back to the podcast to talk more about this, maybe when the book comes out, or when full self-driving becomes full self-driving. We could talk about that. Agreeing that it isn't, that it's... What would be a good way to describe full self-driving? Like partial self-driving? They could just go, it's partial, or just full driving. I don't know. Somebody at Tesla needs to rebrand that solution, because it's totally a misnomer.
It is, but I gather their founder is very attached to it.
He's very into it. Yeah.
And he's notoriously difficult to get him to change his mind.
What? I don't understand. What are you talking about? Thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. This has been a real pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you so much.
That was great. I really enjoyed having that conversation with Andrew. He did say he made one minor error. He said that the iPhone came out in 2005. It was actually 2007, but I don't think it really matters. His point is still valid. The impact that, the mobile internet has had, that the iPhone, Android, etc. have had on our lives cannot be understated. We will have him back. I'll let him finish his book, and then we'll talk to him again. Thanks to Andrew again for spending the time with me. Thanks, as always, to Dark Tapes for the music for this podcast, but also check out my newsletter. Go to growdy.wtf, and sign up for my newsletter there.